Alright, today I'm working on reinforcing the frame on the front of this 1985 Toyota 4Runner. When I bought this truck, it already had a winch mount bumper on the front of it, but there was an issue with the mounting points. The frame cross members are pretty thin on these trucks, and they have weld nuts inside of the frame that bolts go through and thread into. And these weld nuts were starting to tear through the frame on this side, and on this side you can see that crack there, and they're actually pulled forward some, and I hammered them back so it's flush again. And then these upper mounting locations on the Toyotas, it's just this bracket here that's welded onto the top of the frame, and on both sides these welds had torn off, and it tilted forward like this, so the whole front bumper was just sagging down and about to come off of there. So I've cut these things off completely. I'm going to reshape them so I can possibly reuse them, or I might fabricate some new ones. What I'm going to do to reinforce these lower mounting holes is making some steel plates out of 1/4 inch thick steel. I've got one finished up here. It's going to go right over top of these holes, and I can use those holes to locate it. And then this is going to be welded on all the way around, so it's going to add a whole lot of thickness to this frame cross member. I'm going to do that on both sides, and in addition to that, I'm going to use this piece of 1/4 inch thick angle iron. I'm going to cut about a 13-inch wide section of this, and I'm going to weld it onto the frame in the middle here. So it's going to be on there something like that once I get it cut down to length, and it'll be welded vertically and across the bottom and as much as I can get on the back side. And what that's going to do, it's going to reinforce this winch bumper further. This is the bottom of the bumper here, so that piece of angle is going to come forward enough to tie into these rear mounting points for the winch. And this bumper back on there, it'll have a 1/4 inch thick angle bracket in the middle to support it, and then the reinforced factory mounts on the sides, and then the reinforced tabs on the top. And hopefully that'll be enough to keep this thing from bending forward. I didn't feel like fabricating a whole new bumper because this one's fairly decent that someone else made, and I think it'll work just fine with some strengthening. Alright, this one piece made. Let me pick these pieces up before I lose them. I've got the other piece in the drill press now. I was just finishing up drilling the hole in that one. Okay, so I've got these two metal plates cleaned up. I just hit them with a sandblaster to clean all the oil and residue off of them so there's clean metal to weld to. And I used the two original mounting holes in the frame to locate them, so I've got these bolts snugged down just so those plates are where they need to be. And then I'm going to weld these on the frame, and then I'll be able to take the bolts out, and so this will just be a reinforcing piece, and the bolts will go through the bumper mounting bracket, through this plate, and into the frame. And then once I have that bolted in place, I'm going to fit that piece of angle iron underneath and see exactly how that needs to line up, and then I'll be able to tack weld that in place. So now on to the welding. Alright, the welding went relatively well. There was only one small fire because of all the power steering fluid that's leaking all over the frame, but that's a whole separate issue that I'll get to at another time. But those two plates are welded onto the frame now to reinforce it, and now I'm going to cut this angle bracket over here. I've got this piece of angle iron cut down to add in the middle as a brace. I've got the bumper bolted back on to that reinforced section of the frame. And I've got this super sketchy setup with the floor jack and a log to level the bumper so that it's at a right angle to the front of this frame. So this piece of angle iron is going to go right in here, something like that. And it's going to be welded to the frame. And then I'm going to be able to run bolts through this to where the winch mounts. So I'll still be able to unbolt the whole bumper. I don't want it permanently welded on because I may eventually build a different bumper or do something different altogether, but I just want to get this thing reinforced so it's usable the way it is now. So the next step is welding this guy on. So this piece of angle iron is welded on now. These vertical welds were easy enough to get to, but I was wanting to weld it across the back edge here, and there's no way to get in there to see, and I was having to reach in with the MIG gun and basically weld blind behind there. So the welds back here are pretty ugly. Don't look at those. But I was able to at least get 3 or 4 good beads across this top edge on the back side. So when the winch is pulling this way, it's trying to basically twist this piece down. So I wanted to make sure I had some connection back there. And with these mounting pieces being reinforced here, I think it should be sufficient to hold up to some winching. And I still need to re-weld these small little brackets that go here and here. Haven't got those quite ready to go back on yet, but I can show you, give you a rough idea of how this bumper is supported. Oh, at least it's not heavy. Okay. Hold that up there. Alright, so the original spots on the frame, it's going to be able to bolt onto those spots on both sides. And this piece of angle iron is now underneath of it, and I'm going to drill out the 2 holes to get them to line up with the 2 rear winch mount holes. So that's going to be bolted through this, through the bumper and into the winch to add a lot more strength there. And then I'm probably going to add 1 more brace that runs at an angle from somewhere in the middle here, comes up at an angle to the front edge of this bumper to help reinforce it a little more, similar to how these gussets are on the sides. Just 1 more in the middle, just for good measure. And that should keep the bumper lined up while winching. Okay, I have finished up welding everything on the frame here, and I got it, hit it with a quick coat of paint and got it painted and ready to mount the bumper back on. I just wanted to do a quick overview of everything that I did to help reinforce this frame. So the main issue initially when I got this truck is that the weld nuts inside of this cross member were tearing through the frame. This cross member is fairly thin. I don't know what the thickness is, I didn't measure it, but it's not that thick. And these upper brackets here, they were both tearing off of the frame as well. They had both torn off completely on one side. So the reason this happens on these Toyotas is because this thin walled cross member from the factory is just designed to have the bumper brackets bolted on to hold the factory lightweight chrome bumper that came on the late 80s and early 90s Toyotas. It was never designed to be an anchor point for winch mounting. So if you have one of these Toyotas, 80s through 90s Toyotas with this style frame, you're going to run into this problem if you try to do any serious winching with it. If you just use the 3 factory mounting points, the weld nuts are going to start to tear through. These brackets are going to start to tear off the frame. So to solve the weld nuts pulling through, I've welded these 1/4-inch thick plates on the face of this frame. So now they're essentially part of the frame. So these weld nuts can't pull through this 1/4-inch plate. It would have to tear this entire rectangular shaped piece off of here. So it's distributing the load over a much larger surface area. And then in the middle, by adding this piece of angle iron here, that helps to support the rotating force that's caused by pulling on this with a winch. So that's going to take a lot of the stress off of these brackets. And I welded these brackets back on the frame, straightened them out as best I could, welded those back on outside and inside, and then this piece of angle is welded on the sides and across the back. So now all the forces of winching is going to be distributed between this piece of angle in the front and these reinforced mounting points on the sides. And so that should be plenty strong for pulling on it. It's not gonna rip off of the frame. And I can do further bracing, some triangulation underneath if necessary, but this should be sufficient for reinforcing the frame for this bumper that came with the truck. And there's lots of different ways you can reinforce the frames on these trucks, but this is just an example of one way you can do it. And I hope some of these tips were helpful for fixing up your old Toyota. Thanks for watching.